Mad as hell. That's how Pam Gaskin, who's been voting in Texas for 46 years, described her frustration trying to navigate new requirements to apply for a mail-in ballot under Texas Republicans' new voter suppression law. It took Pam Gaskin, who almost never misses an election, 3 attempts over 28 days before she successfully received her mail-in ballot. Her first ballot application was rejected because the new form needed had not been uploaded onto the county website. She tried again with the new form requiring voters to provide Texas ID number like a driver's license or partial social security number, but the number must match what they used when they registered to vote. For Pam Gaskin, that was 46 years ago. So she filled out the application and it was rejected. Pam Gaskin is just one of thousands of Texas voters whose mail-in ballot applications were rejected, as the new law has created confusion among both voters and local election officials. And Pam Gaskin worries that others who experience what she did may just give up, telling the Houston Chronicle, quote, "If you're having all these problems, you might just say, screw it, I'm just not going to do it." And then guess what? They don't vote. They don't participate in democracy. Joining us now is Pam Gaskin, a Texas voter who has finally received her ballot after her application was rejected a couple of times, and Democratic Congressman Colin Allred from Texas. He's a former voting rights attorney. Pam Gaskin, it's really a pleasure and an honor to have you on the show. They were counting on you to giving up, weren't you? It feels like that's what the design of the law was. Let's make voters like Pam Gaskin try and fail and try again and fail and then just give up.
Well, I'm a tough Texas woman, and they're counting wrong. We're going to stay in this thing. I'm 74 years old. I've been through some things. This is just one more thing, but we're gonna vote, and we're gonna try to vote them out. But we're gonna vote. We're not gonna let anyone stop us from voting. This is a power play, and they're not gonna keep that power. So, not going to happen.
You're a longtime member of the League of Women Voters. You know voting. You know how to vote and comply with voting laws. And
absolutely,
you've said that the form seems to you to be very deliberately confusing. It says provide this form of ID, or that form of ID, or that form of ID. And in the end, you just provided every single one they asked for, even though the way it reads, it's only supposed to be one of those.
That's right. It says you must provide one of the following. And the first one is your driver license number. I've had a Texas driver's license for 60 years. I can read and follow directions. I have a degree from the University of Texas at Austin in English. I know how to read and follow directions. I put in my driver's license number because the next line says, if you do not have a Texas driver's license, et cetera, then put in the last 4 digits of your social security number. Well, I had a Texas driver's license, so I didn't fill that in, and I got rejected. So when I got rejected the next time, I just did what good old girls do all the time. Wherever there's a blank, I filled it in, because you're not going to tell me that I left something out.
Colin Allred, I want you to put on your voting rights attorney hat for this one, because I know in your work as a voting rights attorney before becoming a member of Congress, you've interviewed voters like Pam Gaskin who've had struggles like this with voting laws in order to make your case about how these voting laws are actually working. This seems to me to be pretty much exactly what you were predicting this law would involve.
Yeah, Lawrence, we've talked about this for some time. We knew this was going to happen. And they messed with the wrong person with Miss Gaskin. She obviously is not going to allow them to disenfranchise her. But as she said, there are going to be thousands of Texans who will be disenfranchised. And we've seen this before in Texas. In 2014, when they passed the voter ID law, they didn't implement it well. There was no massive effort to educate voters about the changes that they'd made. And then Wendy Davis, who was running for governor at the time, had a hard time voting. Even a former Speaker of the Texas House, Jim Wright, couldn't vote because he had an expired license. And so people who were prominent were affected by that in that election. And, where's the massive effort to educate voters about these really important changes that they've made? We're here in Dallas County where I am. We have 1 in 4 mail-in ballots being returned. Not even the applications, Lawrence. The ballots themselves, 25% of them are being returned right now during our election period.
Pam Gaskin, you've seen it all in Texas during your time. What does this feel like to you, given all the struggles that you've faced in Texas over voting and other issues?
Lawrence, this is Jim Crow 2.0. I saw my parents pay poll tax. I saw them pay poll tax for themselves, and I saw my dad pay poll tax for other citizens up and down the street just to facilitate voting. When I started the University of Texas in September of 1965, the Voting Rights Act had just been signed. And at that time, you had to be 21 years old to vote. So when I turned 21, 3 years later, my dad drove to Austin, picked me up, brought me back to Galveston County, took me to the courthouse the next day, got me registered to vote, and then drove me back to Austin so I could go to my afternoon classes. And he told me all the way back, he said, you will vote every time the polls open. If the only thing on the ballot is dog catcher, you will vote for the dog catcher, because voting, this was his word, is a blood-bought right. I saw John Lewis get bloodied and beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. I saw that on TV, on a black and white TV in Lamarck, Texas. So I've been there. I know what they're doing, and they're trying to take us back, but we're not going back. We're not going back.
Colin Allred, how are you going to get the message to other voters who face these frustrations to help them through what Pam Gaskin had to go through and figure out herself?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just have to say it's an honor to be on here with Miss Gaskin and hearing her testimony about what she's seen. Lawrence, this is why this is so important. This is why it's so personal for people. Yeah. Because this is a blood-bought right, as she said. And this is something that we shouldn't be having to deal with in 2022 in this country. It's just ridiculous that we're even having this conversation. But now it's going to be incumbent upon folks like me and campaigns like ours to try and educate voters who already are going to have a hard time voting by mail because they have to be 65 or older or disabled or out of town for the entire voting period. So we're talking about students, folks with disabilities, and seniors. Trying to really educate them on these bizarre changes that have been made, and they shouldn't have to deal with this.
Congressman
I'm doing a lot of speaking to groups on how to navigate this. And with the League of Women Voters, we don't just register people to vote, we educate people. So it's what I'm working on.
Pam Gaskin, I have another group I want you to continue to speak to, and that's the few million people who are watching and listening to you right now. Please come back and tell us more about what's happening as Texas continues to struggle with this. Pam Gaskin and Congressman Colin Allred, thank you both very much for this discussion tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lawrence.
And coming up, the New Yorker's editor, David Remnick, has written a piece that asks the question, is a civil war ahead? He also put that question to Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And, well, if you think Donald Trump is stupid, and you have every right to, imagine what his lawyers think of him. New York's Attorney General releases a letter that shows that Mazars, the accounting firm, has dropped Donald Trump, and Donald Trump's insane ego demands that Donald Trump release a statement fighting back against that Mazars letter. And when he does that, when Donald Trump does that, he contradicts everything that his lawyers have been telling the judge in that case. And then tonight, in the breaking news of the night, the Attorney General of the state of New York uses Donald Trump's exact profoundly stupid words in his statement against him. That's where that case is tonight. Mazars has flipped. Mazars has flipped, and is working with New York prosecutors in their investigations of Donald Trump. That is the judgment of our first guest tonight, attorney Philip Rotner, who has studied the letter the Mazars accounting firm sent to Donald Trump's company, dropping Donald Trump and the company as clients last week. Philip Rotner writes, quote, "This is a big deal. It means that Mazars has flipped and is now protecting itself, not Trump, or as Trump put it in his statement last night, that Mazars didn't feel it could fight it out. That is undoubtedly the non-waivable conflict of interest with the Trump organization referred to in Mazars' February 9th letter." New York's Attorney General Letitia James revealed the letter in a court filing this week to support her argument that Donald Trump and his children should be forced to comply with her subpoenas for their under oath testimony about the Trump businesses. And in the breaking news of this hour, Attorney General Letitia James has now responded to Donald Trump's statement about her release of that February 9th letter from Donald Trump's now former accountants. In a filing with the judge in the case tonight, the Attorney General says it is truly rare for a party to publicly disagree with statements submitted by his own attorneys in a signed pleading, let alone one day after the pleading was filed. The Attorney General refers to the fact that Donald Trump's lawyers insisted in writing to the court that Donald Trump should not be compelled to testify about his businesses because he does not know enough about his businesses. Tonight, the Attorney General told the judge, quote, "He professes intimate knowledge of his company, its assets, and their values." And in the statement made yesterday, quotes Donald Trump in the statement made yesterday where he attacked Hillary Clinton and the Attorney General. Today, the Attorney General points out that Donald Trump's written rant responding to the Mazars letter begins with Donald Trump's own description of the valuation of his assets, which is exactly what the Attorney General is investigating. In his written statement, Donald Trump boasts, "My company has among the best real estate and other assets anywhere in the world, has significant amounts of cash, has relatively little debt," which is totally current. He then listed specific figures for cash and marketable securities, escrow, reserve deposits, and prepaid expenses, total assets, net worth, total liabilities, and net worth. He went on to say that the numbers don't tell the whole story because, quote, "Based on current enthusiasm and transactions which have or will take place, the brand value today could be, in my opinion, substantially higher." So once again, Donald Trump holds himself out as the highest, most definitive authority on the valuation of his businesses. And he does that in his boastful written statement, which is a direct and complete total contradiction to what his lawyers have told the judge in this case, the reason his lawyers have given for why he should not have to testify. The Attorney General clearly believes Donald Trump's written statement solidifies her right to compel his under oath testimony about the valuation of his businesses. In her filing with the judge tonight, Attorney General James says, quote, "Mr. Trump claims to know exactly what the Office of the Attorney General is investigating." Once again, we see there is no one who testifies against Donald Trump more effectively than Donald Trump. The New York Times has reported that Mazars has been cooperating with the criminal investigation of Donald Trump by the Manhattan District Attorney, and that Trump's principal accountant at Mazars has testified to the grand jury in that investigation. The Mazars letter to Trump specified that Mazars decided last week to refuse to continue working on Trump tax returns that were due this week, saying, quote, "There are only a limited number of tax returns that still remain to be filed, including those of Donald J. Trump and Melania Trump." The Mazars letter pointed out that the due date for those returns was yesterday, February 15th, and added this one specific item about the returns. "We believe the only information left to complete those returns is the information regarding the Matt Calamari Jr. apartment. As you know, Donald Bender has been asking for this information for several months, but has not received it. Once that information is provided to your new tax preparers, the returns can be complete." Now, remember that the Trump company and the company's chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg, have already been indicted for tax fraud in Manhattan for not declaring compensation that included a rent-free apartment, car payments, and school tuition for children. The Mazars letter indicates that Mazars was unwilling to file tax returns that did not properly deal with, quote, the Matt Calamari Jr. apartment, especially at a time when the Trump Organization is already under indictment for using rent-free apartments as undeclared income for people working for Trump. Donald Trump issued a completely incoherent written rant yesterday in reaction to Mazars dropping him as a client, and in it, he said that Hillary Clinton should be executed for spying, and he seemed to just confess to the fraud charges that the company is already facing by writing this. The charge against a 74-year-old long-term wonderful employee, Alan Weisselberg, is that he did not pay taxes on a company car or a company apartment. Do others pay such a tax? Did former Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance pay a tax on his car? And a charge having to do with my paying for the education of his grandchildren. Murderers all over the city, and they are worried about me helping with young children's education. So Donald Trump appears to be admitting that no taxes were paid on the compensation to Alan Weisselberg that included a free car, a free apartment, and free tuition for his grandchildren, a compensation package that was close to $2 million. Donald Trump does not say that all relevant tax laws were complied with. He simply seems to be saying, why are they enforcing tax laws against us? The breaking news from New York's Attorney General tonight comes on top of the news earlier in the day that President Biden has once again crushed Donald Trump's claims of executive privilege to try to block the release of White House visitor logs, including the White House visitor log of January 6th, the most important day in the Trump presidency, the day a Trump mob attacked the Capitol. To claim that White House visitor logs are classified, as Donald Trump has been trying to, is virtually impossible, since the Obama White House and now the Biden White House have both routinely made public their own White House visitor logs. The Biden White House counsel, Dana Remus, in a letter telling the National Archives to release the Trump White House visitor logs to the January 6th committee, said, quote, as a matter of policy and subject to limited exceptions, the Biden administration voluntarily discloses such visitor logs on a monthly basis. The Obama administration followed the same practice. The majority of entries over which the former president has asserted executive privilege would be publicly released under current policy. Accordingly, President Biden does not uphold the former president's assertions of privilege. He therefore instructs you to provide to the Select Committee the records and portions of records identified as privileged by the former president. Leading off our discussion tonight, Tim O'Brien, senior columnist for Bloomberg Opinion. He is the author of the book Trump Nation, about the Trump businesses, and Philip Rotner, an attorney and contributor to The Bulwark. Mr. Rotner, thank you very much for joining us along with Tim tonight. And I want to begin with your legal analysis of the Mazars letter to Donald Trump, dropping him as a client.
Thanks for having me, Lawrence. My legal analysis is that Trump is in big trouble, and you're right to focus on this issue. Just look at what happened. His accounting firm for 10 years fired him. Accounting firms don't fire their clients, especially their big clients, and they cited a non-waivable conflict of interest, which means that they're adverse to him. They're no longer protecting him, they're protecting themselves. They also warned off users that they couldn't rely on the financial information that Trump has supplied. That's terrible in a business where your lifeblood is access to cash and loans from banks. There are outstanding loans that could be called on the basis of the accounting firm saying that the financial information supplied is no longer reliable. And it could be almost impossible for Trump to find new sources of cash, because who's going to rely on his financial statements now? Worse yet, all of this is happening in the midst of a civil and criminal investigation taking place in New York. That all lines up to potential legal disaster for Trump, for his business, and potentially for his freedom.
Tim O'Brien, you've been studying the Trump businesses for years, and also Donald Trump and the way he responds to things. When you look back on the way this has unfolded over the last couple of days, if Attorney General James intended to provoke Donald Trump by releasing the Mazars letter, it absolutely worked. She provoked him into a full admission of what she's been trying to prove, which is that Donald Trump does know about his businesses. He does know how the valuations are arrived at, and he should have to testify under oath about that. His lawyers have been saying, oh, no, Donald knows nothing about it. That's all the accountants do that. He knows nothing about it. He can't help you. And then Donald's ego gets tested by that Mazars letter, and he releases that breathtakingly stupid document yesterday where Donald Trump contradicts his lawyers point by point. And then the Attorney General uses that with the judge tonight.
Yeah, first and foremost, let's remember, Lawrence, that the author of that really unhinged screed that went out last night at one point had his finger on the nuclear button. And hanging over all of this is raw evidence not only of his culpability in these investigations, but of his mental state and the fact that he's about to turn 76 in June, but his maturity still is around the radius of a 7-year-old. And it's always Groundhog Day with Donald Trump. He has been playing the same game of inflating the value of what he has for decades, for at least 5 decades. He's a deeply insecure man who uses wealth as a scorecard. And the second you start to put a little pin near that balloon, he loses control. And his lawyers right now have to be pulling their hair out. On Monday, earlier this week, Trump and his children all said, we don't know anything. Ivanka said she had no knowledge of transactions involving their hotel in Washington, even though she led the deal. And Donald Trump Jr. couldn't even remember what his title was at the company. And their father said he had no specific information or knowledge about his own financial holdings. And then 2 days later, he takes to social media with this letter and in fact gives point by point, very detailed and specific information about his financial holdings. That alone blows up this carefully crafted defense his lawyers have begun to put into play for him to keep him from having to testify to Tish James. So that gets blown up. And then secondly, he engages in all this lunatic proclamations about how much money he has. He says, I have $3 billion in brand value. As I think Philip can attest, no accountant takes people's own estimation of what their brand value might be as part and parcel of how much money they have. And on and on and on. He accuses the prosecutors of forcing his accountants to quit when the accountants have already said in a document that's been made public that they quit because there was an unwaivable conflict. That unwaivable conflict is they're cooperating with the prosecutors. That is why they have left his service. They also don't believe they can make a good faith statement of support for the numbers he's been putting out there. They came too late to this. They should have done it 20 years ago. They finally decided to do it this week. That letter he wrote last night has created a whirlwind of fresh problems on top of what already is a nightmare scenario for him.
Philip Roderick, quickly before you go, with your legal experience, what is your sense of what is happening right now between the Attorney General and Mazars' level of cooperation with prosecutors?
Well, I think right now Mazars is deep into the self-protective mode. They can't do anything about what's happened now. That's past. All they can do now is figure out the best way to move forward. And I think they've figured out that the best way to move forward is to cooperate. They know everything. And so we know that they're talking to the district attorney in Manhattan. We know that they've provided reams of documents. And right now they're spending a lot of time with their lawyers as well. And I'm sure their lawyers are telling them, cooperate. Firing Trump was a good first step. It was a little late. And they may have some making up to do for that lateness. But they're now, I think, doing what they can to get in front of this and protect themselves and not worry about protecting Trump.
Philip Rotner and Tim O'Brien, thank you very much for starting off our discussions tonight.
Thank you.
And coming up, Marco Rubio and 7 Republican senators are now fully supportive